Hello and welcome to today's expert webinar featuring Randy Johnston. We will be getting started right at the top of the hour, so in about 4 minutes here. Just a reminder, if you have not yet done so, you can go to the Handouts tab on the GoToWebinar control panel and download Randy's presentation and follow along there. And also you can go to the Audio tab if you'd like to change from listening in and participating via phone to computer or vice versa. If you select phone, it'll give you a dial-in number and access code. Thanks again for joining us today, and we will be getting started here in just about 3 to 4 minutes. Hello, expert webinar. My name is Div Bensali with AccountantsWorld. Joining us today is Randy Johnston, Executive Vice President at K2 Enterprises, and he'll be presenting the 2019 Tech Update. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. We're really excited for this, the second in our expert webinar series this year. We've got 14 total webinars coming up this year, so very excited to have so many influential people and thought leaders within accounting and beyond accounting joining us this year, certainly Randy included. For those of you who haven't used GoToWebinar in a while, couple of pointers on the control panel. If you don't see the GoToWebinar control panel, look for an orange arrow that will expand or hide the panel itself. You can select your audio options on the audio tab. You can choose to listen via phone or via your computer speakers. If you select phone, it'll provide you with a dial-in number and access code. You can find Randy's slide deck under the Handouts tab if you haven't already downloaded it. And sometimes it is a little bit busy at the beginning of a webinar. Everyone's trying to download it once. So if it doesn't work for you right away, please be patient. It should work later on. If you're not able to access it, let us know and we will email you a copy a little bit later on. And then finally, Randy will be taking questions throughout the webinar, so feel free to type in your questions there for Randy. Make sure to click the submit button, or excuse me, the send button there, so that we can see your questions, and we'll try to get to as many of those during the presentation as possible. We do offer one CPE for today's webinar, and that's based on active participation during the live presentation. Active participation means attending the live webinar for no less than 50 minutes, responding to all of the poll questions during the webinar, and then submitting your post-webinar survey within 24 hours after the webinar has ended. The post-webinar survey will come up as soon as we close out the webinar. You'll see it pop up there. If you don't see it, don't worry, we will email you a link to that as well after the webinar. You'll be notified about CP eligibility early next week, and make sure to add webinar@accountantsworld.com to your trusted email list so that we make sure that our emails are actually getting through to you there. I want to briefly talk about our sponsor today, AccountantsWorld. So I want to start with a question, and then you're going to get a chance to express your thoughts on this in the post-webinar survey 55 minutes from now. So many accountants believe that they've lost control over their core services, including accounting and payroll, thanks to software designed for and sold directly to their clients. This is something that I'm sure you've seen in industry publications. There's been a lot of talk about it. Many accountants believe that they're losing control over their core services despite them being the professionals who should be guiding those processes. Their clients and their software have taken over that control. And other accountants say, this is a system that works well for me. I understand my role within it. I get to make money from cleaning up mistakes and reacting, and that works well for me. So in the post-webinar survey, we'd love to hear what you think about that. Our perspective here at AccountantsWorld is certainly that this is what's happening, that accountants have been losing control over accounting and payroll. And on the accounting side, that's why we created the Accounting Power solution. The basic premise behind Accounting Power is that it's a model that puts you back in the center of client accounting rather than the client and their software being at the center of accounting and you being in a reactive position. So Accounting Power is a unified professional system with full GL functionality, reporting, etc., as well as a module for your clients for bookkeeping and entry and so on. So you control the access that each client has, and this approach gives you a lot stronger control over your overall accounting engagements. This lets you better serve clients who want to offload all of their accounting work to you. This lets you offer client accounting services highly profitably. This also lets you work better with those who still want to do some work in their offices, who still have a bookkeeper, who still have some part-time help, as well as those who still need to write manual checks as well. This system is designed for strength and control and flexibility. Accounting Power received 4.75 stars from CPA Practice Advisor. You can learn more about the solution at accountantsworld.com/AP, AP for Accounting Power. So I'd like to talk a little bit about Randy Johnston before I turn the floor over to him. Randy is an Executive Vice President at K2 Enterprises. He's been a top 25 thought leader in accounting for 8 consecutive years and was inducted into the Accounting Hall of Fame in 2011. The reason Randy's joining us today is that he is one of the, if not the, leading voices in technology for accounting firms and has been for over 3 decades. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Randy Johnston.
Well, Div, thank you very much, and certainly a pleasure to be with you and the audience today. And I think at this time you should see my intro slide, and we have much to do in our time together today, so I'm going to move right along fairly quickly on this. Immediately going here into just a couple of intro things. It's helpful to look back, I think, historically at anniversaries. And of course, this year is the 100th anniversary of confirming the general theory of relativity by observations during Eclipse. And Einstein as a scientist was exceptionally popular in his day. They would actually greet him in crowds yelling, Einstein, Einstein, rah, rah, rah. Science has come a long way since 1919, but a lot of the things we do in computing are possible because of some of Einstein's discoveries. And it's also the 500th anniversary of Leonardo da Vinci's death. Really a versatile person that I've admired through all of my life, I would say. But Da Vinci knew anatomy and architecture and art and cartography and so forth. Really a pretty interesting person. And, you know, so much of the time we're told to focus, and Leonardo da Vinci said, yeah, I think it's more interesting to be diverse. Well, there's another birthday along as well. Cortana, the voice inside Windows 10, is actually 5 years old this year. Microsoft actually coded in a personality brief that said Cortana should be witty, caring, charming, and intelligent. And the voice is Jen Taylor, who voiced Blue AI in Master Chief, as the Master Chief John in Halo, which is interesting as well. Assistant apps are going to have a lot more personality along the way. In fact, the product manager, Marcus Ashe from Roomba, noted that in a study that the floor cleaning vacuums, if you will, were assigned traits like crazy or spirited, and that people reported the Roombas as family members by name and age. Well, I'm not quite that far over the top on my robots, but I do want to point out that Google has filed a patent for bespoke AI robot support. So I suspect we'll get kind of one-off voice and robot support in the not too distant future. Well, this year is a big year for communications, and in fact, internet access is still not broad around the world. About half of the world doesn't have internet access, but 48% do. And frankly, affordable internet access around the world is still a problem. But here in the United States, roughly 77% of the US population have internet access, although oddly enough, out of the 395 million cell phone subscriptions, only 25% of those have data plans at this point. Now, historically in these webinars, we've talked about communications like Google's Titan solar drones, or the Facebook Aquila product, or the Google Loon idea. And while all of those have been retired and are still slightly in use, we think there's a pretty new, big breakthrough. And in fact, if you look at my Twitter feed, I posted about this over the weekend. It turns out CubeSats are a big breakthrough that is in the process of happening right now. These satellites are put in low Earth orbit. Two competitors here, OneWeb and SpaceX, are the big players. Lots of satellites being launched. The key thing that makes LEO work where other satellite technologies did not were low latency. You can see a 30 millisecond latency for OneWeb and a projected 4.2 on the SpaceX products. And these satellites are very, very tiny, but we had pictures recorded over the past week or so of the launch of some of the SpaceX CubeSats. But if I can have you think about the world being surrounded by satellites, and each of these work as kind of a mobile cell phone tower. In effect, what happens is we have coverage up above us instead of on the ground with traditional cell phone towers. And that really brings us to the big new breakthrough of the year, 5G, which is in production now. Now, to really get true 5G speed, we're going to have a lot more backhaul, terrestrial or some other method of getting access to the internet. I think the complete rollout will take years. I did note today that, in Wichita, Kansas, they're going to run autonomous vehicles downtown and on Wichita State University campus using the new 5G that's been deployed in Wichita. But the key release has happened in Minneapolis and Chicago at this point. AT&T has a dozen cities, probably will be 20 yet this year. We have hotspots that are available to us with the Netgear Nighthawk 5G. Verizon has service in Houston and Indianapolis and LA and Sacramento, and notably has hand instruments with the Moto X as well as the Samsung S10 5G. The holdup on the cell phones will be the big stumbling block since Apple has confirmed they are not intending to release 5G handsets this year. So it was a pretty big deal for Verizon to turn live the coverage in Minneapolis in time for the NCAA Final Four. I had a friend of mine that was downtown confirming that he had a 5G extended service over the weekend. And as it turns out, we think 5G will be in lots and lots of different places as we progress. But the handsets are the stumbling block. If you've got an iPhone 8 or later, you will get the extended service in the meantime. The vendors are focusing around the Qualcomm chip family, and since Apple has settled their Qualcomm lawsuit, we'll see them beginning to use the Qualcomm chipsets. Intel, of course, exited the business saying, yeah, this mobile thing we're not going to be able to break in. But 5G will impact lots of industries. There's actually 20 industries listed in the link that I've included for you, but you'll notice manufacturing and energy and agriculture are among the top 3, with our accounting services actually being in the second set of 10. Another key technology is the ability to handle emergency situations through a new service called FirstNet. Oddly enough, I'm going to get this FirstNet coverage here in my own hometown of Hutchinson, Kansas, because we are one of the pilot sites for this, and my team's helping with some of the build out. This service is being provided under a 25-year contract with the U.S. government. The intent is to have 99% coverage across the U.S. One of the challenges is getting the coverage inside buildings, but an integration of cameras at intersections, the use of callers' cell phone cameras and drones, and geo-mapping to route the first responders around traffic are all part of the features. So far, the build is about 53% complete after doing 18 months of the work. So we've got another 3.5 years or so to go, but we will see the launch in 2020 of this particular service. So Div, I think this is a pretty good time for our first question of the afternoon.
Okay, sounds great. So, folks, I've launched our first poll question here. So you should be seeing it in front of you. The question is, which of the following statements is true regarding 5G? Please go ahead and select one of the following. 5G rollout will take several years. It's available now. It will take new smartphone technology to take advantage of, or all of the above. So please go ahead and select your option. Make sure to click the submit button to make sure that your vote is counted.
And needless to say, Dev, I'm pretty excited about 5G for what it'll do for our performance all across the US.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I see about 90% of you have responded at this point. So we'll take about 10 seconds for the final folks to go ahead and respond. So please go ahead and select an option. Make sure to click submit here as well. And we're going once, going twice, and okay, Randy, so we have 79% of people saying all of the above, 13% saying 5G is available now.
Yeah. So notice it's a big deal because it is going to be all of the above, I believe, is the correct answer there. So moving ahead then, more communications things include our communications in our homes or Internet of Things. And one of those standards is Z-Wave. It's available in a new form called Z-Wave Plus right now. It's really the 5th generation of this. And we believe that the plug and play ease of use of Internet of Things, particularly in homes, may be far enough along now to consider doing this. We believe that other competitive methodologies like Thread, or for that matter, Zigbee or ANT and others are actually going to fall a little bit more by the wayside, much like we saw happen with the Lowe's, discontinuation of their product. This is still a little bit risky if you go down this path in terms of hitting the standard, but we think Z-Wave Plus is going to be that. Now, there is another new branding out there on Wi-Fi. And we're going to want you to watch for Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 5 this year. The branding is changing from the old 802.11 monikers like AX and AC to this Wi-Fi 654.321 numbering. The minimum compatible hardware, we believe, is that which is 802.11 AC Wave 2, and it is likely to be labeled Wave Wi-Fi 5. Now, why is this such a big deal? Well, there's some components of this, particularly WPA3 for encryption, which will make us comfortable recommending the public use of Wi-Fi for the first time ever. We've been categorically against using public Wi-Fi because it is so easy to break and there's so much security risk. However, the standard won't be final until late in the year, November 2019, and the Wi-Fi Alliance won't actually offer certifications until the August timeframe. But if you can begin to picture no more 802.11xxx, it's going to be Wi-Fi 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1 if we're referring to this. And I do have a link in the materials so you can read more about that. But this WPA3 is a big deal because of the single-use key encryption, and it does make it safe enough that you can use these public Wi-Fis if they're WPA3 enabled. Now, there's supposed to be backward compatibility with WPA2, but we do not recommend that because you eliminate the security benefit. There is also a certified product finder that I've included in the materials, which shows the products that are compatible with the new generation standards. Now, another thing that I discussed on this update last year was the use of HDMI 2.1. We believe it should be used everywhere. You can see here I'm holding a cable that is larger than a typical pen or pencil in my hand in the upper picture. And the lower one, I'm holding a product from that has connectors from a company out of Germany, Silicon Line. And what that is a fiber optic cable with little transceivers in it. Very light, very effective. The cable is about the size of a thick pencil lead, so way easier to work with, and frankly about the same dollars. We think you need HDMI 2.1 to support the larger more monitor formats like 8K, but it also gives us greater range. So here's the simple admonition. Use HDMI 2.1 in your homes or businesses, and we think you're better off on the new fiber optic cables, which you'll see from a wide variety of vendors. Now, we have also been suggesting that following the display HDR standard is good. We have new additions for laptops this year with the True Black HDR 400 and 500, and a few other updates across the standards. We think for most accountants, the HDR 600 is the most useful. You'll see here in a small video, and I hope this will play effectively over the remote access, that there's interference that is occurring inside this picture, and then about halfway through, it just clears and stops being an interference. And that interference is nothing more than a single digit of interference in a 1 second window. So this bit correction is a big deal. If you're getting interference in your monitors today, we think HDR can knock that down. Now, I'll refer to this particular product a couple of times. We believe that the ability to hook up multiple different types of displays and multiple displays is a big deal. This docking station will do DisplayPort or VGA or HDMI or DVI out of the same device, and that's kind of a big deal. And it has error correction on board and gigabit internet, and Wi-Fi 5 and 6 is slated for its future and so forth. That's kind of a big deal to get multiple monitors running. Another thing that is working today is a technique known as Li-Fi, and this is using light for communications instead of radio spectrum. So think Wi-Fi replacement. And we see Wi-Fi having interference problems. In fact, I was working in the Detroit area this past week, and it was clear there was Wi-Fi interference. So perhaps Li-Fi might be in your future as well. We're also pretty interested in following LiDAR. LiDAR has been used for a lot of self-driving cars, but it's use beyond autonomous vehicles includes agriculture and river survey, modeling pollution, archaeology, building construction, and many other types of things. In fact, you'll see LiDAR referred to in just a moment for our home speakers as well. So we have used USB in various formats over the past few years. Later this year, the USB 4 standard will arrive. It will deliver 40 gigabit, and it will use the same connector as we've been using with 3.1 and 3.2. One interesting development here is a dedicated video channel known as alternative mode, which basically allows 20% of the bandwidth to drive high performance monitors. It also keeps the channels open for networking and hard drive access and so forth. So again, pretty big changes in communications. So Div, it's probably time for us to ask another question.
Okay, sounds great. Let me go ahead and launch the second poll question here. So folks, you should be seeing it in front of you. Which of the following statements is true regarding video connections? 3 options, and then the fourth one is all of the above. So if you can go ahead and select which option you believe is correct and click the submit button.
And while we're waiting for those responses, Div, I've seen the attendee list and again, know many of you, so I welcome you along today. And if you do have questions, I'll do my best to handle them as we go.
Sounds great. All right, so we are at about 90% of folks having voted, so we'll again give another 10 seconds or so for people to get in their votes if they haven't done so yet. All right, going once, going twice. Okay, Randy, so we have 54% of people saying all of the above, 31% saying HDMI 2.1 can handle all signal types.
So you've got an idea that you'll want to look through some of those standards. And again, all of the comm standards that I've laid out, I think will get use over time. So in terms of security, again, we're not trying to do a security presentation with you today, but we want you to be aware of some pretty significant changes that are in your near future. If you happen to be in the Microsoft Windows 10 world, Microsoft is working to deploy a passwordless type of environment. We'll see connections to their Azure directory and some more multi-factor integration in the near future. They're going to leverage their Hello capabilities, that's the fingerprint or facial login, as well as tokens like you see pictured with the YubiKey. Now, this passwordless environment will change the way we work, but in the meantime, we're going to need multi-factor authentication. We're still recommending Duo as a primary strategy. That product was acquired by Cisco last August, and the number 2 product in this category right now is the Okta Adaptive MFA, which has the additional advantage of providing single sign-on, meaning you can have multiple applications running in browsers and it will provide the user ID and passwords for those various environments. Most of the other MFAs are weak enough or have a shortfall that I'm not super wild about recommending them. Further, we believe that if you allow remote working, you should always use multi-factor authentication or MFA. So that's a pretty big deal in terms of a strategic technology initiative that if you're not using MFA, you want to get that implemented. Now, Microsoft's going to try to drive us more into their Active Directory integration. They're currently using LDAP versions 2 and 3. They're going to require an Azure AD integration right now still by the October 2020 timeframe, and they expect to again provide some more single sign-on capability. In the meantime, Okta is our favorite single sign-on product, and another product, InSync's Cloud Runner, is probably second best for those of you in accounting. Further, our smartphones are doing some work on these areas too. In the Android environment, the mobile device machine learning for TensorFlow has been turned on. On your iPhones, the use of core machine learning, taking advantage of the neural engine 8-core chip in the iPhones has been turned on. The Azure cognitive systems can be deployed on either iOS or Android at this point. And we think it's interesting that Amazon has built a new machine learning tool, Inferentia, which is working on voice recognition and human language for their Amazon Echo products or for Alexa's learning. And there's been a lot of press around those areas lately. Now, one more area that I am hopeful will get more adoption, but it may or may not win, a thing called SQRL, the Secure, Quick, Reliable Login, developed by Steve Gibson. Now, I've known Steve for 40 years probably, smart guy, and has developed a single-use, one-time authenticator with a QR code. So you can basically use this QR code on a website, for example, and allow a public key, private key encryption to log in. It's a beautiful, brilliant, and widely available methodology. So maybe we'll see some more that way. One other security item that I want to make sure you ask your IT people to look at and most likely turn on. Ransomware is now coming at us through our Office 365 accounts. In many cases, it's coming through OneDrive and other sources there. Microsoft's recognized that as a threat. This has been around for a couple of years, so this is not new, but they've finally released some tools to try to mitigate some of these risks. So in February 2019, they released the Advanced Threat Protection Plan 2 and audit logging, which should be turned on in your accounts. And they also in March released the Active Protection Service, which also should be turned on. So those two things, if you do not have them on, you might want to ask about that. Now, there is another significant thing that's happened with Microsoft, and it's their ability to upgrade Windows 10 on demand and then use the version history to restore. So that's a pretty big change in there. These security initiatives will become more important. In fact, as I watch the threats in the security front, all of the vendors are trying to figure out how they respond to the threats that are out there. So I think, Div, this is a time for a third question.
All right, sounds great. Let me go ahead and get the third one launched here. Third question, which of the following statements is true regarding security? So again, 4 options available there. The fourth one is all of the above. So please go ahead and select which option you believe is correct and click the submit button there as well. Randy, one question that came across was, Anne is asking, is there an optimal antivirus for CPAs?
Yeah, I'd seen that question from Ann, so thank you for making sure we address that. Right now, Ann, I believe the best antivirus is WebRoot. That particular product is a heuristic product. It is a lighter touch and fairly highly accurate. I'm not as much of a fan of signature-based antiviruses, that'd be the Semantics and the McAfee's and so forth of the world. Out of the signature-based antivirus, probably the best there is Viper. Now, you will see that there are whitelisting antiviruses that are available as well. They take a little bit more maintenance, and I'm not quite as prone to recommend them, but examples there would be Barkley or Carbon Black. Again, those are very, very aggressive antiviruses, but they can cause you problems in tax software updates and some other conditions. So my general rule here, WebRoot, the heuristic antivirus.
All right, thank you. So, folks, we'll take 5 seconds here. If you haven't put in your vote, please go ahead and do so. And we'll go ahead and close it up now. All right, so Randy, we've got 71% saying multi-factor authentication is minimal best practice, 22% saying all of the above. Randy, are you there?
Sorry, I had muted and had not clicked it back on. Thanks, Dave. So
No worries.
you'll notice that in security, you're going to have to do all sorts of things you've not been used to doing before. MFA is the minimal that I think you should be doing for remote workers, and you're going to wind up fighting this battle on multiple fronts, and it won't matter whether you're premise-based or cloud-based in the near future on this. Again, it's a pretty heavy war out there. So let's flip over into hardware now. This section will run a little bit longer. There's plenty going on in this area. I want to start with Intel, who has yet to successfully release their 10 nanometer technology. Therefore, it's more likely going to be third, fourth quarter. In fact, I'm really thinking even into the fourth quarter right now. It is also clear that the trades that are reporting on this are basically saying the 7 nanometer chips have been a lot more successful than expected. And we know that Intel is having luck with their Arizona Fab 42 producing 7 nanometers. So in my mind, there's even been a question about will they skip directly to 7 nanometer. Intel on Friday made additional announcements on their chips and so forth, and they've demonstrated their, Lake Sunny Cove microarchitecture that includes advanced things like Thunderbolt 3 and Wi-Fi 6 and their deep learning boost technology, and something we talked to you first about 10 years ago, 3D memory chips are built into this product. So the 9th gen core processors are just now rolling into the laptop lineup. Again, I had posted recently on some of the Intel Core i9 pieces along the way, so you can look for some of that as well. Unfortunately, Intel chips have had design problems. In 2018, the Spectre and Meltdown were a couple examples of that. The most current issue is one called Spoiler. As of today's broadcast, I do not know of a way to fix this. And if you're making new product purchases, I've listed 3 chips here that actually have been repaired so they do not have the spoiler problem. Now, throughout this year to date, there have been pretty radical shortages of processor chips and hence computer shortages. We know many of you are going to replace computers this year in anticipation of the Windows 7 Office 2010 discontinuation. And where you've normally gotten your computers turned in, let's say, a few days or a week after you've ordered, I would encourage you not to think that's going to happen now. We're seeing delays of 6 and 8 weeks on some product orders at this point. And so again, don't wait until after extended tax season, October 15th, and believe that you're going to get your computers installed by the end of the year. That actually may not happen. And we have not seen that in quite some time. Intel also has noted that they've been in this server and desktop business for a while, and there's been reports of desktop volumes being down, but I can tell you both 18 and 19 desktop volumes are up. Further, Intel is expecting to break more into the data center business, and they went on to report on May 8th that the server and desktop business was a $52 billion business, but if you throw in data centers, it's $300 billion. And they want to leverage some of their acquisitions, Altera and Mobileye and Optane Memory and some other things. And they expect to go head-to-head competing against NVIDIA in the GPU market as well. Now, a threat out of Taiwan is the TSMC manufacturer. Most of you on today's webinar are using TSMC products, particularly if you have a smartphone. Most of those are manufactured by TSMC. These guys also do the Qualcomm manufacturing, and they've been building chips in 7 nanometer geometries, the 855, and later in the year we'll see an 8CX. The 8CX is interesting because it'll have about the capability of an Intel i5, but with longer battery life, right now projected in the 22 to 24 hour range. So if you have frontline workers that you've been buying i5s for, we're thinking as early as the first quarter of 2020 that the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8CX design might work for you, and it will include 5G radios as well. I've been a proponent of HIPAA laptops, and HP has released a HIPAA monitor, the 243P, and it is actually quite brilliant. I've mind kind of what happens with these monitors when you look at them from one side or the other. You can really only see a clear image when you're head on. So they have upgraded the SureView in the G2, making a true black 1000 nit display. It's absolutely gorgeous. Actually, I think it's prettier than anything you can get in the Apple line right now. And we expect responses from Dell and Lenovo as well. These guys are going to transition from their G5 into the G6 lines this year. But there have been some really radical laptop design innovations that we've noticed this year. I think my favorite one was a offering from Asus where the screen as a touchpad was used. So it was really a dual screen, one above and one down in the touchpad area, where you could see things and run the touchpad as a secondary screen. Asus had a very nifty Paperwhite keyboard. It's very similar to the Kindle designs that we've had for 10 years or so. And of course, the Lenovo Yoga Book keyboard design and so forth was unique. Again, I've seen more innovation in this past 12 months in laptops than I'd probably seen in the prior 5 years. So the vendors are trying to be thoughtful about this. Additionally, you should know that the quantum computer race is heating up. IBM did introduce their 20 qubit system 1 in January. I've got a picture for you on the right, and the thing is actually suspended in a 9 by 9 by 9 airtight glass cube to maintain the environment. Now, 20 qubit computer is not really big enough to be very practical, but there are problems that you can solve with this quantum computer. So over the next little while, we expect these things to scale in a pretty radical way. Now, in Tech Update, I tend not to talk about things that aren't available, but I made an exception for this year because it was such a big deal. DisplayLink has come up with a concept of an adaptable USB dongle that you can plug into any device and share screens in a meeting room, and you can have your screen take over all the projection, or you can have a couple of people up there. You can run your laptops or desktops from the meeting room screens and so forth. The presenter was quite clear, hey, this is prototype only, but this is the most interesting design I've seen for a meeting room in a long time. I just think about how people walk into a meeting room, they always have trouble getting connected, and it's actually hard to share more than one display. This is really perfect. You can just converge into a meeting room, plug in the dongle, and you're active on this particular display. Now, meeting technologies in general have pretty radical shifts going on this year. One of them from Lenovo is this camera and speaker. It is a 360-degree camera and speakerphone. It is designed to work with the Surface Hub 2 and Cisco telepresence units and others. And again, at $249, I think it's a real winner and something that would be wise to purchase. These are not new materials. I just added over the weekend when I was reviewing our content for today. But I wanted you to know that the speaker units, like we have with the Amazon Echoes or the Harman Kardon Cortana units or the Google units, Google Home units, are all getting retrofit with vision. And in fact, using LiDAR, the Amazon Echo speaker has been able to sense users and respond to hand gestures. So in effect, the speakers are seeing and then doing based on the hand gesture and so forth. This particular unit called Surface Sight is not the only approach. Audio Analytic is also doing a lot of sound recognition work as well. And another one called Naki is doing the same type of thing. So I think we're going to see sight added to our home speakers in the not too distant future. I've been using actually the Spot from Amazon simply because I wanted the video camera to be able to do conference calls with my wife when she's at home and I'm on the road. Speaking of on the road, if you need a much higher quality speaker, The Lenovo 700 ultra portable Bluetooth speaker at 100.5 is also a pretty good buy. So again, as you think about your mobile workers, think about what they need to be productive, and additional ports are likely to be needed in the USB-C format. So this is shipped at $100. It gives enough throughput that you can support 4K displays and many other things. Very small form factor USB-C hub. We also recognize that scanners are still needed to convert paper documents into electronic format. On the low end of the market, the smaller scanners, we do prefer the Canon products because of their Twain interfaces. We think they are less expensive and higher quality and better value than the Fujitsu ScanSnaps, which many of you own. And the Canon line is actually very competitive up into about the 60-page range. So again, not trying to get you to switch vendors necessarily, but if you're looking for new good capabilities, the Canon scanners we're quite pleased with where they stand. And remember that for your mobile users, we think the docking stations make sense, whether it's the Targus or whether you're using the D6000 from Dell or others from your own vendors that represent a simple way for your users to hook up in a hurry. And I really want the mouse and the keyboard to be connected. And I prefer the docking stations that support multiple operating systems as well. Now, ergonomics is a big deal, and we have stand-up desks that are much less expensive than the ones I've pictured here. But from CES this year, we saw a couple of designs that were interesting, although too expensive, we thought, for what they were. The Centrix Smart Desk, you can see here, is about a $5,000 deal, but it has this boomerang-shaped top to work from, which is actually quite elegant, along with appropriate spaces for laptops and keyboards and so forth. Another one that I like the design of, and it actually was productive, was the Yoon Ergonomics desk. It had a tilted flat screen, which is the design that I've talked about since touchscreens first came available, and you could easily move it up and down. So you could sit at this thing and you could stand up with it. But again, at $10,000, I didn't think it was a very wise thing. Now, in terms of guidance, we do believe that stand-up desks make sense. We recommend that no more than about 2 hours per day is used at a stand-up desk. I typically recommend like 10:30 to 11:30 in the morning, and then maybe 3 to 4 in the afternoon. So sometimes in the latter part of the work split days, it is not really good for you to stand the entire time, just like it's not good for you to sit the entire time. Well, that brings us then to another one of my favorite products of this year. A year ago, I started talking about Quilt as being a nifty way to share photos and store data and so forth. This year with the Quilt 2 and the Quilt 3 unit, you can have a device that is a backup appliance that seamlessly backs up your photos and videos from your Android or iOS phones. It can also back up data from your computers, and it can replicate site to site. And the high-end unit is $149 for the gigabit appliance. So by the time you throw a 2 terabyte solid state in here, for about $250, you've got exceptionally high performance automated backups running. Again, wonderful little device. So you can see, Div, the hardware world has changed quite a little bit. So this is probably a good time to ask the next question on hardware.
Okay, sounds good. Let me go ahead and launch up poll question number 4. Which of the following statements is true about computers? And you see 3 options there, and then the 4th option is all of the above. So please go ahead and select your option there. Randy, a question came in from Lori. Will Apple products be more vulnerable if and when apps are purchased outside of the Apple App Store?
Yeah, so Lori, on that one, that is very clear, yes. And in fact, I'm very adamant about suggesting you should only get your apps from the major stores. So in the Apple world, from the App Store there, or in the Android world, from one of the major providers, whether that's Google Play or Amazon and so forth. And the reason for that is the vendors are vetting the apps in the stores. They still have a hard time keeping out the bad guys. And both Apple and Google, for example, reported thousands of malwares that they had to delete this year as they were doing their security vetting. So we recommend staying in the stores.
Okay, great. Um, and while we'll close out the poll in about 10 seconds here if you haven't voted. Don asked, what is the wave description that you mentioned before?
All right, I'll say there's two things of wave. You have the 802.11 AC now called Wi-Fi 5, which is wave 2. And then there was also just the Z-Wave, which is the Internet of Things connection. So if you use Z-Wave Plus, you'll be in the Gen 5 environment there. So we want on wave 2 on Wi-Fi 5, and we want Z-Wave Plus for Internet of Things. So I hope I got the right two waves answered there for you, Don.
All right, sounds great. So Randy, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you here.
All right, I appreciate that, Div. So at this point then, I'd like to use the last little bit of our time together talking about some software. And one of the new products that I found this year, which I like very much, is a commercial loan analysis tool called Commercial Loan Success. It basically does a one-sheet analysis for bankers with a scoring probability of getting a loan. And I don't mind disclosing that when I was starting my own businesses, that local banks, even though I had properly structured the loan documentation and thought I was a pretty good risk, wouldn't take the loan. So today here in the United States, out of the 30 million small businesses, about 21 million use some form of credit, and about 27%, or about 8 million, couldn't secure adequate financing. And I think that's actually unfortunate. We're still here many, many years later. But the idea to generate a one-sheet analysis and a return analysis in software, it's really gorgeously done with this product. So for those of you in public practice, I think you can perform a service doing this. And for those of you in industry, it can help you structure your deals. Now, my wife and I were talking about this over the weekend. Again, I don't want to sound political on this, but I want you to understand there's some risks out there that are pretty ugly. One of those is a piece of software from OpenAI that can generate fake news articles after having a very few pieces of information. The texts that are generated, or the articles, are stunning, according to Sam Bowman from New York University, and I've seen them, and they are. All of these natural language projects have kind of a Sesame Street theme. You can see Google has a similar tool called BERT, and the Allen Institute has one called Elmo. And there's been quite a bit of traffic in the last 3 weeks on deep fake videos. In fact, one was released last week as well. I want you to understand these things are going to become so good that you will not be able to detect that they are, in fact, false. Another one that is really unfortunate and has surfaced again in the last week as well, the NSO group out of Israel has been providing a piece of software called Pegasus to spy on people directly. Governments around the world are their clients. About 100 countries have purchased from them. And out of the Fortune 500, a significant number of Fortune 500 companies have bought these things as well. Now, all of these tools can be used for good or bad. The prior, writing tools could be used for creative writing. And, in this particular case, the Pegasus spy software was used against Khashoggi in the Saudi Arabia attack. And it was also used to capture El Chapo in Mexico. And so I want you to be aware that these types of products can be planted on your cell phones, whether they're iOS or Android, or your computers without your knowledge, and the detection tools don't detect them. So there's some real ugly tools in software that are being used out there. Now, from a browser perspective, you should recognize that Microsoft has basically said, look, our Edge product, it's never going to be a big winner. So we're going to change it to the Chromium engine underneath. And frankly, we've just been calling this Edgium kind of lightly. But you should understand that the Chrome browser and now Edge that also runs on the Chrome engine will continue to be pretty dominant. Further, we expect Firefox and Safari and the other browsers to have more native support for progressive web apps. And that's a big deal when it comes to apps because we can work offline. Security in search is also a concern. Google and others are tracking way more than I would prefer. So we do see new generation search tools like DuckDuckGo that are making sure that their software isn't tracking you. So again, you may say, look, Google or Bing or Yahoo or whatever your favorite search engine is, I don't care if it tracks me, but if you're more concerned about privacy, you've got a better world, I think, with DuckDuckGo. Now, also in accounting, SaaS has continued to mature. Good solutions are available from AccountantsWorld with Accounting Power, mid-market products like Acumatica, and others are having good success. So we want you to be aware that these products have matured and we think are worthy of consideration. Further, this year is the year of workflows. And among those, Microsoft Flow or Zoho Flow or Zapier and others like Boomi and CData can all do digital plumbing to hook these applications together. So we expect more of these puzzle parts like I had on the prior slide to allow us to hook these systems together through software like the digital plumbing apps. Now, Microsoft Office has been going through a pretty radical change as well. Office 365 has some additional parts that aren't in Office 2019. I have a live link there to allow you to drill through to see what's in various versions of Microsoft Office. Hundreds of changes are being made per year. I believe the correct number for 2018 was 170 changes. Sorry, for 2017 was 170 changes. I've not been able to find an accurate number for the number of changes for 2018, but we think there's more than a couple of hundred. So Office 365 is the way Microsoft wants you to get Office, but they're going to most likely force us to also subscribe for Windows and mobile device management, and that product is called Microsoft 365. For small businesses of less than 300 seats, you can see pricing is $20 versus roughly $12.50. We're also going to have more sophistication in mobility. Inking is becoming pretty common, so we can do that on our mobile computers, our tablets, our touch screens, and we can also apply a little more texture like an artist might like. As I'd mentioned earlier, a very good update from Microsoft in the spring update version where we could defer updates, and that download and install now option is a big deal because Microsoft was forcing us to take updates on their schedule. And they've now permitted us to defer that a bit and take the updates more on our schedule. Now, the big cloud computing and data center vendors are continuing to focus on hosting applications, Amazon Web Services, Azure, Iron Mountain Rackspace among those. And you also have hosting companies competing for this. Recognize that the hosting companies provide some additional services where the public cloud data centers are more of a self-serve approach. So I do have a grid that I can provide that compares these. You have my contact information, so if you want that, you let me know. And as it turns out, the vendors are trying to figure out how to take care of all these big cloud environments. So each vendor will have some new utilities to help us watch these statistics. Amazon, for example, has rolled their Cloud Watch. So that allows technical people to understand what's going on from a performance perspective. But I would caution you that for a while, we're still going to be in a hybrid world. Microsoft has bought some tools to make their ability to do hybrid easier. IBM did the same thing by acquiring Red Hat for $34 billion. They floated about $20 billion in notes in the last few weeks. And of course, Dell is doing the same thing. We're seeing it on all fronts. One thing that made all this cloud stuff take off was virtual machines. And we taught you about that in the 2006 through 2008 timeframe as it was really ramping up. A new technique called containers is going to supplant that, I think. And how long will it take? Not sure, 2 or 3 years. But the days of virtual machines are coming to a close in favor of this new container strategy. So we'll want you to keep a eye on that as well, or watch that. Further, we're seeing a little bit more of a repatriation, moving from cloud back to the edge in some cases. And the edge computing is really to get more performance. And there's a wide range of technologies that are kind of forcing that at this point. So you'll see more cooperative computing or distributed computing, if I want to use the old way of thinking about it. And as the vendors have put these high performance chips in their data centers, we're seeing the need for some of these chips out on the edge. So NVIDIA has had good success, and a year ago we recommended that you have more compute power, more graphics compute power at a local workstation. And finally, in this section, we want you to be aware of the Open Data Initiative, a cooperative strategy between Microsoft and SAP and Adobe. And what they're trying to do is leverage Microsoft's data lake. The way they're doing that is defining tables and fields for a wide variety of business use cases. And then they're helping vendors code to that. Now, the idea probably came out of their Dynamics 365 world, but Microsoft is hooking Power BI and Office 365 directly, and Adobe and SAP have committed to do the same thing. More vendors will get here. So we think that's a pretty big deal in the long haul. So as more of these services wind up more in the cloud, you're going to have to focus just a little bit more on data governance. So I think, Div, just kind of watching our time, we're at about the hour. There's a few items that I just want to bump to here in personal technology. And one of those is to watch that foldable phones will become more popular, even with Samsung's issue with their release of their Flex phone. We expect over time our phones to be almost worn like bracelets. We do see some tablets that are quite gorgeous, with the Aldo Cube being one example out there. So just be aware that you've got more of those types of things coming. So I think at this point, Div, it probably makes sense to ask our last question.
All right, great. I'll go ahead and get that launched. And while I do, question that came in from Arlen that you can perhaps answer while I'm putting up the final poll. Please explain container versus virtual machines.
Yeah, so Arlen, on that one, the key thing on that is that virtual machines have always been an emulation of a computer system. And so basically they were a disk file and they could be picked up and moved around, but they basically still simulated a server or a computer desktop operating system like Windows or Linux or Mac. On a container, this really allows a complete isolated user space. So in the container can only see data files or devices that are assigned to the container. So they run a little more independently, a little more discreetly. They have less overhead in them. More of them can run in a shared environment, and the security can be increased. So again, a container has a whole operating system and has all of these security isolation features, whereas a virtual machine is basically an emulation of a computer system. Now, from an end user perspective, will you see a lot of differences? No. But for example, the developers that are working in this will be able to drop their applications into the containers, be able to get better performance and have greater security over time. So it really allows us to isolate the applications more.
All right, sounds great. Folks, if you have not voted in the final poll question, I'll give about 5 more seconds here for that. And then, Randy, after this poll, did you want to close with anything, or should I take back control here?
I think, Div, it probably is fine to have you close out. I'll just mention while they're voting on this, I've got a couple of sections which are personal and some odd things that are out there, and they may want to take a peek at that in the handout materials. But no, I think we've covered a pretty good overview of what's happening in the market today.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, thank you so much for your information today. As usual, incredibly in-depth. Folks, I encourage you, I did this last year. Take Randy's presentation and take a look back through it, especially some of the slides that he went through quickly. After the fact, you'll find that it's so much more feature-rich than the already very rich presentation that you just saw. I want to thank you again for joining us today. Our next expert webinar is on June 19th. That'll be Joel Sinkin talking about CPA for mergers and acquisitions 2019. He has some interesting updates in there in the world of mergers and acquisitions. If you haven't registered for all of the expert webinars, you can do so at 2019webinars.com. Also, just a reminder, you'll see the post-webinar survey pop up after this. It'll ask you about today's presentation, and then we've also included a question in there about the statement that I had before Randy's presentation about whether accountants have lost control over their core services. So we look forward to hearing from you and your perspective on that as well. Randy, thanks again so much for joining us today and for your time.
We appreciate the opportunity to present for your group here today, and we look forward to seeing many of you around the country.
That sounds great. Thanks to all of you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again in 3 weeks or sooner.